A patrol car rolled to a stop beneath the frozen lights of Silver Ridge. Inside, Officer Ethan Ward thought it would be just another quiet winter night, until he found a cardboard box trembling in the snow. Inside were 3 German Shepherd puppies and a note that read, "Please give them a chance. They have no mother." What began as a simple rescue soon uncovered something far darker. A child trapped in silence, a father's cruelty buried behind closed doors, and a bond strong enough to melt even the coldest heart. Because sometimes, miracles don't fall from the sky. They crawl out of the snow, wrapped in fur and faith. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of faith, kindness, and the quiet miracles that still walk among us. Snow drifted across the quiet town of Silver Ridge, turning the empty streets into a sea of white. The storm had silenced even the hum of the power lines. Under a flickering street lamp, a police SUV rolled slowly through the snow, its headlights cutting thin paths of gold through the frozen dark. Behind the wheel sat Ethan Ward, 36, a man built from muscle and silence. His face, once bright with laughter, had settled into the kind of stillness that only comes after loss. 3 winters ago, his wife had died in a highway crash during a storm just like this. Since then, Ethan moved like a man who kept his grief folded neatly behind his badge, always in control, but never at peace. His short brown hair showed the first signs of gray, his jawline rough with a day's stubble, and his eyes, cold gray-blue, seemed to reflect every snowfall he'd ever endured. The night was quiet, until his headlights caught something odd. A cardboard box, sitting by the bus stop bench, half buried in snow. For a second, Ethan thought it was trash blown by the wind, but then the box moved. Just slightly. He slowed, instincts sharpening. When he stepped out, the cold sliced at his skin through the thick sheriff's coat. The wind carried that sharp, metallic scent of frozen metal and exhaust. Ethan crouched beside the box, brushing away the fresh layer of snow. The lid was sagging under frost, and from inside came a faint whimper. Carefully, he peeled it open. 3 tiny German Shepherd puppies lay inside, pressed together in a trembling heap. Their fur was matted and soaked, little noses twitching from the cold. One tried to lift its head but collapsed against the others, too weak to move. They couldn't have been more than 2 or 3 months old. Around them was an old towel, stiff with ice, and a note tied to the corner with string. The handwriting was uneven, almost childish. "Please give them a chance. They don't have a mother." For a long moment, Ethan didn't move. The words cut through the numbness he'd worn like armor for years. He looked down at the 3 small bodies, breathing shallow, still fighting, and felt something shift inside him. He took off one glove, tucking the puppies gently into the fold of his coat. Their warmth was fragile, like the memory of something long lost. As he carried them to the car, one of them whimpered again. A tiny sound, desperate but alive. He turned up the heater, laid them across the front seat on his thick scarf, and wrapped them in the emergency blanket from the back. When the engine hummed to life, Ethan noticed something else in the box. A small red plastic fire truck, one wheel missing, half buried in the snow. He picked it up, turned it over in his hand, and frowned. The edges were worn, the kind of toy only a child would treasure. He placed it beside the note on the dashboard. A quiet thought pressed through his mind. Someone cared enough to leave them, and someone young enough to still believe in hope. The puppies stirred faintly under the blanket. The smallest one, a female with a pale patch over her eye, nosed at his wrist. Ethan smiled for the first time in months. Just a twitch of the lips, but it was real. "All right, little ones," he murmured, voice soft against the howl of the storm. "If you're going to survive, you'll need names." He looked at each one in turn. The largest male, steady and watchful, even in weakness, Rex. The smallest, curious and bright-eyed, Luna. And the one who pressed its paw against his sleeve as if to hold on, Scout. "Rex, Luna, and Scout," he said quietly. "Let's get you warm." As the SUV pulled back onto the road, the headlights glowed against the endless white. The storm roared, but inside the cab, 3 small heartbeats thumped faintly beneath the hum of the heater. Ethan's hand rested on the steering wheel, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel completely alone. The fire truck on the dashboard gleamed red under the streetlight, a small, broken thing left behind by a child. And somehow, Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The morning came pale and sharp, sunlight breaking weakly through clouds that still spat flakes of snow. The storm had passed, but Silver Ridge remained wrapped in white silence. The roads glimmered with frost, and every breath turned to mist in the frozen air. Ethan Ward, his eyes heavy from a sleepless night, stepped out of his cabin with the carrier box secured in his arms. Inside, the 3 puppies stirred softly, Rex, the largest, alert even when tired, Luna, the smallest, whimpering now and then, and Scout, pressed protectively against his siblings. Ethan's breath fogged around him as he whispered, "You're safe now. We'll get you checked out." He drove toward Willow Creek Animal Care, a small timber-fronted veterinary clinic on the edge of town. The sign swung gently in the wind, its paint faded but neat. When he opened the door, the warm air carried the scent of pine disinfectant and coffee. Behind the reception counter stood Dr. Grace Monroe, a woman in her early 30s, tall and slender, with a quiet strength about her. Her chestnut brown hair was tied back loosely, a few strands brushing her cheeks. She had clear, intelligent eyes the color of moss after rain, eyes that had seen pain but learned not to flinch from it. Grace moved with the calm precision of someone who had rebuilt her life one gentle step at a time. Years ago, her father had died in a winter highway accident while trying to rescue a wounded deer, and ever since, she had chosen to heal what others had forgotten. When she saw Ethan, her voice was measured, polite. "Rough night?" He nodded, setting the box on the counter. "Found them by the bus stop, half frozen. Someone left a note. Said their mother's gone." Grace's expression softened. "Let's take a look at them." In the small exam room, warm light spilled across steel tables and jars of antiseptic. Grace lifted each puppy gently, her hands steady and sure. "They're young," she murmured, examining Luna's belly. "Their stomachs are still distended, means they were nursing recently." She looked up at Ethan, her brow furrowed. "If that's true, their mother didn't die long ago. 1, maybe 2 days at most." Ethan's jaw tensed. "You think she's nearby?" "Could be," Grace said, removing her gloves, "but not alive, if she hasn't come back for them." Something in Ethan's chest twisted. The memory of his late wife, the crash, the storm, the silence afterward, surfaced like a shard of ice. He had buried her in a world covered in snow just like this. He remembered the helplessness of it, the same kind that echoed now in these small, trembling lives. He thanked Grace, promising to return later. As he stepped back into the cold, the sun had turned weakly gold, hanging low over the Pine Ridge. He drove slowly along the rural highway, eyes scanning the snowbanks and fences. Then, near an old wooden boundary lined with barbed wire, he saw something that made his breath catch. There, half buried in snow, lay the body of a full-grown German shepherd. Her fur, once thick and glossy, was stiff with frost. A dark stain marked the snow near her head. Ethan knelt down, brushing away the ice. The wound was brutal, a blunt force strike, likely from something heavy. Around her neck hung a chain collar, rusted and still wet with blood. Etched onto the small metal tag was a name: Parker. He pulled off one glove and touched the collar, fingers cold against steel. Beside the dog's body, partly frozen into the snow, was a child's mitten, blue with tiny stitched stars. Small enough for a 10 or 11-year-old. Ethan stared at it, the wind biting his face, bisito. He wasn't just looking at evidence anymore. He was seeing the ghost of a story. A home where someone had loved this dog once and someone else had destroyed it. His voice came low, almost a whisper to the dead animal. "Someone loved you, and someone else made them afraid." He placed the mitten and collar carefully in a plastic evidence bag, but when he looked at the lifeless shape again, duty felt small compared to what stirred inside him. That night, back at the station, he wrote his report with clinical precision. Location, cause of death, possible link to animal cruelty. But beneath the paperwork, his heart had already decided something else entirely. This wasn't just a case, it was a promise. To the puppies asleep in their blanket, and to the unseen child who had tried to save them. The wind cut through the edge of Silver Ridge like a blade. Out past the main road, where the snowplows never bothered to go, A line of battered mobile homes huddled together against the cold. Tin roofs groaned under the weight of snow, and smoke curled from a few broken chimneys. It was the kind of place where people disappeared from the world, not by distance, but by silence. Ethan Ward parked his cruiser by the fence of a sagging lot, the engine still idling for warmth. His hands rested on the steering wheel for a moment before he stepped out. The tag he'd found on the dead dog's collar lay heavy in his pocket. Parker. That name had been echoing in his mind all night. The Parker residence sat near the end of the row, paint peeling, one window boarded with cardboard. As Ethan approached, the faint sound of a TV filtered through the door. Loud, angry voices from a game show. And beneath it, the dull thud of a man coughing. When the door finally opened, Frank Parker filled the frame like a storm cloud. He was in his mid-40s, thick-bodied, unshaven, and reeking of whiskey. His hair was black but greasy, his skin red from the cold and years of drink. There was a mean sharpness in his eyes, the kind that never truly focused, only judged. He squinted at Ethan's badge. "Sheriff's office, huh? What the hell do you want?" Ethan's tone was steady, professional, but his voice carried a weight that could silence most men. "Just a few questions. You own a German Shepherd?" Frank's expression soured. "Had one. Stupid mutt ran off last week. Probably froze to death. Why?" Ethan studied him. "You sure about that?" Frank snorted, scratching his beard. "Yeah, I'm sure. What, you think I killed it or something?" He laughed, dry and ugly. "I don't have time for this." Before Ethan could speak again, Frank slammed the door halfway shut. Through the narrow gap, a flicker of movement caught Ethan's eye. A boy's face behind the torn curtain. Pale skin, thin cheeks, eyes dark with fear and curiosity. For a moment, their gazes met. Then the curtain dropped. Inside, Noah Parker, 13 years old, stood frozen. His small frame was lost inside an oversized gray hoodie, sleeves covering bruised wrists. His light brown hair fell unevenly over his forehead, and there was a faint scar above his left eyebrow. Old, healed, wrong. Noah wasn't the kind of child who cried loudly. He'd learned early that silence hurt less. His father's anger came in waves, predictable, numbing. The dog had been his only shield, his only warmth, and now, even that was gone. Outside, Ethan slipped his hand into his coat pocket and touched the child's mitten he'd found near the dead dog. The size, the color, blue with tiny stitched stars. It had to be this boy's. He looked once more at the house, the snow crusting over the steps, and placed a small plastic bag on the porch. Inside it were the mitten, the chastisticade, broken red toy fire truck, and a folded note. "If you were the one who left the puppies, they're safe now." He turned, boots crunching through the snow, and drove off into the fog. That night, sleep didn't come. The wind howled against the windows of the station, and Ethan found himself glancing again at the 3 puppies sleeping beside the heater. Scout, the friendliest of the 3, stirred and rested his head on Ethan's boot, as if sensing the ache in the man's chest. Just past midnight, Ethan decided to drive by the Parker house again. The streets were empty. No lights, no sound but the hum of the engine. As he parked across the street, he noticed movement. A small shadow slipped out the front door, closing it quietly behind him. It was Noah. He wore no gloves this time, only a thin coat, his breath clouding in the air. In his hands, he carried something, a small stuffed bear, its fur worn thin at the seams. He crossed the street and stopped in front of the police station's steps, hesitating only for a second before setting the bear down. Then he pulled a small paper note from his pocket, tucking it beneath the toy's paw. Ethan waited until the boy had vanished back into the dark before stepping out. The note was written in shaky, slanted handwriting. "Thank you for saving them. Please don't tell my dad." The stuffed bear stared up at him from the snow, its button eyes dull with melted frost. Ethan swallowed hard, the cold biting deep into his lungs. He looked toward the black outline of the trailer park, where the boy had already disappeared. He whispered, more to himself than to the night, "You didn't abandon them, kid. You saved them." Inside the station, the puppies stirred again, their soft breathing filling the silence. Outside, snow fell thicker, hiding footprints, covering pain, but not erasing it. For Ethan Ward, this was no longer just a case. It was the beginning of a vow to protect what innocence remained in this small, broken town. The wind screamed over Silver Ridge, turning the town into a blur of white and shadow. Power lines swung like dying branches, lights flickered, and the main road vanished beneath drifts of snow. Inside the police station, the emergency radio crackled through static. A dispatch from the Southern District. Domestic disturbance. Frank Parker, suspect intoxicated, child injured, suspect fled on foot. Ethan Ward didn't wait for backup. He grabbed his coat, flashlight, and keys, motioning to Dr. Grace Monroe, who had stopped by earlier with medicine for the pups. Her steady eyes, usually calm like still water, tightened with worry. "I'm coming with you," she said, already zipping her parka. Ethan hesitated but saw the resolve in her face, the same quiet strength that had carried her through the loss of her father years ago. He nodded once. "All right, but stay close." The drive through the storm was slow and brutal. Snow whipped across the windshield like claws, and every turn of the wipers only revealed more darkness. When they reached the Parker trailer, it looked half buried in the storm. The windows were dark, one shattered, the door hanging open. Inside, the air reeked of alcohol and smoke. Furniture overturned, glass on the floor, and in the corner, Noah Parker, curled against the wall, clutching his worn stuffed bear like a lifeline. His lip was bleeding, one cheek swollen red. At the sound of footsteps, he flinched violently. "It's okay," Ethan said softly, kneeling. "You're safe now." The boy's eyes widened, recognizing him. "He's gone," Noah whispered. "He said I was just like her. Then he left." Grace crouched beside them, her hands gentle but sure as she checked his bruises. "Nothing broken," she murmured. "He's shaken, but he'll be okay." Ethan wrapped the boy in his coat and lifted him carefully. "Let's get you somewhere warm." They drove back through the storm, the cruiser rocking in the wind. At the station, the backup generator hummed weakly, casting a soft orange glow. As Ethan opened the door, three small shapes bounded toward him. Rex, Luna, and Scout, tails wagging, whining with excitement. Noah blinked in disbelief. You kept them?" Before Ethan could answer, the pups surrounded him, licking at his hands, noses pressing into his coat as if confirming something only they could sense. Noah's eyes filled with tears, his small hands trembling as he stroked their fur. "They still remember me," he whispered. Ethan smiled faintly, voice low. "Not just remember, kid. They've been waiting for you." The boy laughed, a small, cracked sound that broke the heaviness of the room. Grace leaned against the desk, watching the scene, her expression softening. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "the heart just needs a reason to start beating again." Hours later, word came over the radio. Officers had found Frank Parker staggering near the gas. Station, drunk, belligerent, half frozen. When Ethan arrived, the man spat curses through slurred words. "They're just dogs," he muttered. "Useless mutts." Ethan looked at him, the broken man who'd turned his pain into violence, and then at Noah waiting in the patrol car, the puppies asleep in his lap. He clenched his jaw, voice calm but edged with truth. "No, Frank. Those useless mutts saved a soul you tried to destroy." Outside, the storm began to quiet. Snow still fell, but softer now, glimmering under the flicker of the streetlights. Inside the car, Noah drifted to sleep, his small frame surrounded by the warmth of three faithful companions. For the first time in years, Ethan felt that the world, though cold, could still be mended, one act of kindness at a time. Spring crept slowly into Silver Ridge, soft and deliberate. The snow that had ruled for months began to melt from rooftops, dripping into puddles that mirrored the pale blue sky. The air still carried the chill of winter, but sunlight was beginning to win. Ethan Ward stood on his porch, hands in his jacket pockets, watching as Noah Parker chased three small German shepherds, Rex, Luna, and Scout, across the yard. Their paws splashed through the melting snow, fur glinting gold in the light. For the first time, Ethan's home didn't feel like a tomb of old memories. It felt alive. A few months had passed since that night of the blizzard. Frank Parker had been sentenced to serve time for abuse and endangerment, and Noah had been placed in social care. But things didn't end there. Ethan and Dr. Grace Monroe, after long talks and a visit from a social worker, had filed for adoption. When the judge asked why, Ethan's answer was simple: because the boy deserves a home that doesn't fear the sound of footsteps. The paperwork took weeks, but now Noah belonged here, in a house that smelled like coffee, wood smoke, and wet dog. He moved quietly at first, still unsure where he fit in. But with time, laughter began to replace silence. He learned to pour kibble into bowls, to dry the dogs after rain, and even to train them to sit, stay, and paw. Grace visited often, bringing supplies and warmth that felt almost like family. She had started something new, Paw Haven, a therapy program for children who had survived abuse. She explained it one evening while stirring soup on Ethan's stove, her hair loose, catching the amber light. "Animals don't ask for your story," she said. "They just listen, and sometimes that's enough." Ethan smiled, leaning against the counter. "You've got the heart for it." She looked up. "And you've got the space." That's how it began. Paw Haven opened inside a converted barn behind the clinic, painted white with wide windows to let the morning light spill through. Rex, Luna, and Scout became its first therapy dogs, each wearing small blue vests stitched with their names. Children came every week, some quiet, some angry, some too fragile to speak. And somehow, the dogs reached them when words couldn't. At the program's opening day, sunlight poured through the wide doors as families gathered. Grace greeted visitors, her calm voice steady as always. Ethan stood near the wall, hands crossed, watching Noah. The boy was setting up a small wooden table with his treasures: the stuffed bear he'd never let go of, and the broken red toy fire truck he'd once left with the puppies. He placed them beside the welcome sign, adjusting them carefully. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "Now their mom won't be cold anymore." Ethan's throat tightened. Grace turned, eyes glistening, but neither spoke. The three dogs barked suddenly, chasing one another in circles around Noah. Their laughter, the boys and the dogs, filled the barn, spilling into the crisp afternoon air. As the sun began to sink, painting the walls gold, Ethan looked toward Grace. "You know," he said quietly, "maybe God doesn't send angels with wings after all." She tilted her head, smiling softly. "No?" He shook his head, watching Rex nuzzle Noah's shoulder. "No. Sometimes he sends them with 4 legs and eyes that still believe in love." Outside, a few snowflakes drifted lazily through the fading light, melting the moment they touched the earth. Inside, laughter mingled with the steady crackle of the fire. Hope had finally found its home. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or wings. They come quietly. In the bark of a rescued dog, in the laughter of a child who finally feels safe, or in the warmth of a stranger who decides to stop instead of passing by. When Ethan, Grace, and Noah found each other, it wasn't fate that changed their lives. It was compassion, the kind that begins with a single act of courage and ripples outward, touching everyone who dares to care. Because maybe that's how God still works in our world today. Not through grand gestures, but through ordinary people who choose kindness when it's hardest, who become his hands, his voice, and sometimes his quiet miracles. So, as you finish this story, take a moment to look around. There's someone near you, human or animal, who needs that same second chance. Be the one who gives it. May God bless you and your loved ones. May he guide your steps, soften your heart, and remind you that love still saves. If this story touched you, share it with someone who believes in miracles. Leave a comment below. Tell us what part moved you most. And don't forget to subscribe so together we can keep spreading stories of faith, kindness, and second chances. Because when love acts, heaven listens.